Welcome to this explainer. Today, we aren't just looking at some dry, dusty legal document from antiquity. Oh no. We're unpacking the ultimate high stakes farewell speech by a dying leader standing literally on the edge of the promised land. This is a profound final address delivered by Moses to a massive multitude of people. They're about to cross into completely unknown territory, and you can just feel his determination to give them absolutely everything they need to survive before he's gone. Right off the bat, we really have to recognize the sheer philosophical and cultural gravity of this text. It contains incredibly famous lines like this one, right? A universally recognized statement about the deeper spiritual needs of humanity that totally transcends just physical survival. I mean, this exact text has laid the foundational worldview for literally billions of people throughout history. It's a work of immense historical weight. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the serious rule whiplash we're about to get. We go straight from these towering philosophical statements to hyper-specific, everyday micromanagement. It's almost as if Moses, knowing his time is totally up, is desperately trying to think of absolutely everything, from the grand structure of justice all the way down to what you should do if you happen to find a bird sitting on its eggs. He clearly wants to leave absolutely no stone unturned. So, to make sense of all this dense material, we've got a fascinating roadmap to explore together. First, the ultimate farewell address. Then, remembering the wilderness, the core 10 commandments, rules for a new society, bizarre and surprising laws, and finally, taking the promised land. Kicking things off with part 1, the ultimate farewell address. Picture this, an entire nation camped out in a sweeping wilderness plain, fully aware that their legendary founder won't be joining them for the final, most dangerous leg of their journey. The source text firmly grounds us here with some highly specific coordinates. It's the 40th year, the 11th month, the first day. They're camped out on the east side of the Jordan River. Now, Moses has just led them to these massive military victories against local kings, but God has told him he cannot cross the river himself. So this is it. It's a true do-or-die moment, and Moses begins to declare the law. Moving into part 2, remembering the wilderness. See, before Moses can tell them how to build their future, he actually forces them to look backward. He needs them to remember exactly how grueling their journey has been, so they don't go repeating the mistakes of the past. And man, what a journey it was! The text points out it's normally just an 11-day trip from Mount Horeb to Kadesh Barnea, but because the people rebelled in fear after sending spies into the land, a whole generation was condemned to wander. It took 38 more years just to cross the brook Zered. But now, in the 40th year, having finally defeated some formidable giants, and I mean, who could forget King Og of Bashan, who famously slept in a massive iron bed, they are finally ready. Next up, part 3, the core 10 commandments. Okay, let's dive into this. Moses now pivots from history straight to the foundational principles that are going to hold this entire group of people together. This is the covenant famously established out of the fire at Mount Horeb. He recounts the 10 commandments to this new generation, and it is rapid-fire, high-minded, constitutional bedrock. We're talking the absolute prohibition of other gods and graven images, the mandate to rest on the Sabbath, honoring parents, and the strict bans on murder, adultery, theft, false witness, and coveting. Moses makes it incredibly clear here that these 10 pillars are the unshakable foundation for absolutely everything else that follows. And he really doesn't mince words about the stakes. He presents the society with a stark binary choice that will actually be physically represented in the landscape itself. On Mount Gerizim, they're to pronounce ultimate blessings and prosperity if they adhere to the commandments. But on Mount Ebal, a terrifying list of curses, destruction, and being scattered among the nations if they rebel and serve other gods. It's a completely all-or-nothing proposition. Which brings us to part 4, rules for a new society. Now that the big spiritual principles are established, Moses starts translating them into ground-level civil and criminal laws. This is how you actually run a nation, and a massive cornerstone of this new economy revolves around the number 7, specifically the 7th year of release. Think of it as an ancient economic reset mechanism. Every 7 years, debts were to be completely forgiven, and Hebrew servants were to be freed and liberally supplied with flocks, grain, and wine upon their release. Moses frames this essentially as an early welfare and anti-poverty system, commanding them to open their hands wide to the poor so that no one remains permanently destitute. He even anticipates a day when they're gonna want a king, and he sets up these brilliant stipulations that act as an ancient system of checks and balances. The king is strictly forbidden from hoarding immense wealth, building a massive cavalry that would mean dealing with Egypt again, or taking a ton of wives. And to prevent absolute tyranny, get this, the king is actually required to personally write out a copy of the law and read it every single day so his heart isn't lifted above his brethren. It's a surprisingly sophisticated ancient setup, right? Of course, the laws also extended right down to the dining table. Strict dietary requirements separated the clean from the unclean. To be eaten, a land animal had to both part the hoof and chew the cud, like an ox or a sheep. Pigs and camels, totally out. Seafood had to have fins and scales. Predatory birds and scavengers were strictly banned. But remember, these aren't just menus. These rules were deliberately designed to forge a distinct, separated societal identity from all the surrounding nations. The criminal justice system here was incredibly robust, too. It even accounted for unsolved murders found out in an open field. The law demanded absolute accountability to purge the guilt of innocent blood from the community. They would have elders measure the distance to the nearest city, and the leaders of that specific town had to perform a highly solemn ritual with a heifer in an unplowed valley, literally publicly washing their hands and declaring their innocence in the bloodshed.
All right, moving into part 5, bizarre and surprising laws.
Now we move from the grand halls of justice right down into the weeds. Everyday actions were deeply, deeply tied to their worldview. Moses spends a lot of time on micro details here, and honestly, some rules seem completely bizarre to modernize. Things like a strict ban on plowing with an ox and a donkey together, or the prohibition against wearing clothes made of mixed fabrics like wool and linen. And this brilliantly illustrates how the law encompassed everyday public safety too, like the strict requirement to build a battlement or railing on the flat roof of a new house so nobody accidentally falls off. It's this incredible overarching concern for both deep spiritual purity and very practical community welfare. And I really mean they governed every single aspect of daily life. Moses even lays out highly specific sanitation rules for the military camp. The logic here is that the camp must remain physically and spiritually holy because the divine literally walks among them. So apparently, a holy camp requires very strict bathroom etiquette, commanding everyone to carry a small paddle or shovel to dig a hole and bury their own waste outside the camp limits. It's such an incredibly surprising, kind of humorous detail to find mixed right in with all these towering spiritual mandates. Finally, we arrive at part 6, taking the promised land. Moving on from camp sanitation, the tone dramatically shifts toward the grim reality of what actually awaits them across the river, an impending military conquest. Moses lays out the strict rules of ancient warfare, and there are some truly surprising psychological and ecological exemptions here. Like, before besieging a distant city, they must first offer terms of peace. They're explicitly forbidden from cutting down fruit-bearing trees to build siege engines. Amazingly, they are to send home any soldier who just built a house, planted a vineyard, or got engaged. They even dismiss the fearful and faint-hearted so their panic doesn't spread to the rest of the troops. Now, the text does impartially command a very different, totally destructive reality for specific, local Canaanite nations, completely prohibiting treaties or survivors to prevent assimilation into their religious practices. Yet the narrative pushes past the warfare to this incredible emotional peak. Moses commands that once the conquest is over and the people are finally settled in the land, they're to bring a basket of the very first fruits of their harvest to the priest. And they are to recite this powerful acknowledgement, publicly declaring that the grueling journey of their ancestors out of affliction in Egypt and through that terrifying wilderness has finally been completed exactly as promised. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from sweeping timelines to roof battlements and the rules of war. But what's truly fascinating to consider is just how much of this ancient blueprint actually remains relevant. As you look at these ancient codes, their checks and balances on power, their focus on providing for the poor, their insistence on fair trials and innocent blood, it invites a pretty profound reflection. After peeling back all the layers of these ancient codes, how many of these foundational pillars of justice and society are still quietly propping up our modern world today? Keep that in mind as you think about where our civil structures truly come from. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.